In this module, we're going to be talking about attitudes, emotions, and ethics. But this first lecture, we're just going to concentrate on attitudes and looking at them and looking at the ABC model of an attitude. We know that an attitude is a psychological tendency expressed when we evaluate a particular entity with some degree of favor or disfavor. And attitudes are closely linked to behavior, so that's why it's a very important factor in organizational behavior. So managers need to understand the different components of attitudes. So if we look at this and we spell out the ABC, the first thing is the affect or the emotional component. And how we measure that is by physiological indicators. And when we talk about physiological, it's physical that's going on with you. So you hear someone say, oh, my blood pressure's going up. Well, that's a physiological indicator. Then verbal statements about their feelings. An example of that would be, I don't like my boss. And then B is the behavioral intent. That's towards a person or an object, and it's an observed behavior or verbal statements about intention. That's how it's measured. An example would be, I want to transfer to another department. And then C in the ABC is cognition or thought, and that can be measured by attitude scales, verbal statements about beliefs. You might say, I believe my boss plays favorites at work. So an individual does not have an attitude until he or she responds to an entity, and that's a person, an object, a situation, an issue, and on an effective behavioral or cognitive basis. And so these three components are important to know, especially as a manager. So let's take a look at cognitive dissonance. When we talk about cognitive dissonance, that's a state of tension that's produced when an individual experiences conflict between attitudes and behavior. It should be understood by managers because you're going to have employees that find themselves in situations in which their attitudes conflict with their behavior. And sometimes the employees will find the conflict so strong that they'll leave their employment because they're not able to do what's being asked of them, or they don't feel that it's right. It doesn't really fit in with their attitude. It doesn't fit in with their belief system. And then let's look at influences on attitude formation, because everyone's got one, and we know that attitudes are learned. We know that they evolve over time, and there are two major influences on that. There's direct experience. So that's the stronger attitude which are held confidently. And those are the ones you believe in your heart that you know, and you're resistant to change. These are the most powerful that are out there. It's just something that you absolutely know, you've had the experience, and so that's your attitude on it. And then it's active in one's cognitive process. It's something that you think about quite frequently. Then there's social learning. That's where you derive your attitude from your environment. It comes from your family, your peers, maybe even your religious organization. And modeling is where it's acquiring attitude by observing others. That's where culture plays a big role. It's where you want to fit in with what the norm of your culture is at that time. And it, again, if you've traveled internationally, and I know when I have, it's just very different, especially going into different countries, of what they view as their norm. And then attitude, behavior, correspondence. We know that they are very closely related, attitudes and behaviors. And so you have very specific attitudes, and the greater that is, the stronger the link is to the behavior. You possess both general and specific attitudes, and the more specific, the stronger the link is to your attitude. And then just attitude relevance. Attitudes addressing an issue of self-interest result in behavior consistent with the expressed attitude. Timing of measurement. The shorter the time between the attitude measurement and the observed behavior, the stronger the relation. One of the examples your textbook gives is that voter polls taken closer to election time are more accurate than those taken further out from it. Continuing this, we know that personality factors. Here's the self-monitors. We talked about that. These are the people with the on-off switch. So self-monitoring affects the consistency between attitudes and behavior. So high self-monitors, those people that know how to turn on-off switch, they're more responsive to situational cues. They know how to walk into the room, they know how to read the room, and they know when they need to turn off an attitude and when they might need to turn one on. But if you're a low self-monitor, oh my goodness, you're relying on yourself and you're relying on an internal state, and a lot of times that can be dangerous. And then there's just the social constraints. The social context provides information about acceptable attitudes and behaviors, and will be compliant because of social norms. We know that when we walk into a movie theater, at some point in time, we've got to get quiet or we're going to be in trouble. If we walk into a church, that we've got to have hushed voices. So it's what the social constraints are at that time of how we're going to behave. This wraps up on attitudes, and we're going to move here in just a minute and talk about job satisfaction.